Timing, 5 minutes, opening framing, welcome to month 5. This is the session where the architecture you have been administering becomes genuinely complex. Multiple agents, multiple environments, multiple teams, and multiple DLP boundaries. Everything you configured in months 1 through 4 was building toward this moment. Spend a moment on each bullet. Multi-agent topologies, child, connected, and A2A patterns, when each is right and what each costs you administratively. MCP server connections, a capability in Copilot Studio that opens an entirely new governance surface. Power Platform connectors as agent tools, the authentication mode choices that determine whether you have auditable data flows. Skills governance and HTTP request node DLP controls, the two easiest places for governance to slip, and DLP audit across multi-agent solution boundaries, the hands-on deliverable for Hour 4. The common thread across all 5 topics is that complexity compounds. A governance gap in one agent propagates silently across every agent connected to it. The skills this session develops are precisely the ones that prevent those silent failures. Key teaching point. The autonomous agent you built in month 4 becomes the orchestrator in month 5. You are adding sub-agent specialization and external integration capability to that foundation. Question to pose. Before we start, when your single agent from month 4 calls out to an API, who owns the DLP policy that governs that call? Take 2 or 3 answers. The correct answer is the environment the agent lives in. Keep that in mind as soon as we add a second environment. Timing, 5 minutes, set expectations, 5 objectives that stack on each other. Walk each one, emphasize the practical output. Objective 1, the decision matrix. By the end of this session, you should be able to look at any enterprise scenario and immediately classify which topology pattern is appropriate. The matrix on slide 5 is the reference artifact you will use on the job. Objective 2, MCP server connections. This is a configuration task in Copilot Studio, but the governance implications extend beyond the portal. Knowing what the agent sees, how DLP applies, and where the tool addition gap is, will make you the person your team calls when something unexpected happens after an MCP server update. Objective 3, connector tools with appropriate authentication modes. Appropriate is the key word. Using maker credentials on an HR API is not a configuration error in the technical sense. It works. It is a governance error. That distinction matters. Objective 4, skills governance. The allow list default state is a lateral movement risk. That is not a theoretical risk. We will see exactly how it manifests. Objective 5, DLP audit across a multi-agent solution boundary. This is the Hour 4 workshop deliverable. By the end of today, you will have produced a completed audit table for a real topology and a remediation plan. That artifact format is directly transferable to your production tenants. Key teaching point. These 5 objectives cover the full life cycle from design to build to governance. No session ends without a governance artifact. Timing, 3 minutes, logistics and signposting 4 blocks, 1 for each hour. Hour 1 covers topology theory and the Meridian financial case study. The case study is not background material. It is the scenario scaffold for everything that follows. The HR orchestrator topology you build in Hour 3 is the remediate version of what Meridian actually went through. Hour 2 is dense. MCP, connectors, skills, and HTTP node governance, plus the integration mapping workshop, plus the A2A protocol deep dive. There is a break at the end of Hour 2. Build that into your pacing. Hour 3 is the build challenge. You construct the Meridian HR orchestrator multi-agent topology in your developer tenant. The facilitator checkpoint at 2:50 is not optional. Topology must be verified before Hour 4 audit workshop makes sense. Hour 4 opens with the DLP boundary audit workshop, then participant presentations, then the month 5 close and month 6 preview. Facilitation tip. Point out that the build challenge in Hour 3 is 40 minutes of heads-down work. Participants who fall behind in the conceptual hours will struggle to recover during the build. Flag confusion early. Question to pose. Do we need everything from month 4 completed before this session? The month 4 autonomous agent becomes the starting point for the hour 3 orchestrator. If someone did not complete month 4, they create a minimal new agent as the orchestrator. The topology patterns are what matter, not the specific agent content. Timing, 20 minutes. Core conceptual content. 3 topology patterns govern every multi-agent architecture decision you will make. Get genuinely comfortable with the distinctions before moving to the decision matrix. Child agent shares the parent's solution. No independent existence from an OM perspective. When you promote the parent solution from DEV to test to prod, the child comes with it. No separate pipeline, no separate deployment. Use it when the parent is below the tool count threshold, roughly 30 to 40 tools, and when the same team owns everything. DLP is inherited from the parent's environment. You only audit one policy. Latency is minimal. The hop is essentially internal to the same agent runtime. Connected agent, separately solutioned, can be promoted independently through DEV, test, and prod. Use this pattern when the parent has exceeded the tool count threshold, or when different teams own different subdomains and need independent release cadences. The governance cost is higher. Each environment has its own DLP policy, and you must audit both. There is one additional network hop per call, a 2A external agent, entirely outside your Power Platform boundary. The connected system lives on a different platform. Azure AI Foundry, Microsoft Fabric, M365 Agents SDK. You do not control its OM. You do not control its DLP. You need a bilateral data sharing agreement. Use this pattern for cross-organizational orchestration or cross-platform specialization where no Power Platform alternative exists. The split trigger deserves its own moment. When an orchestrating agent exceeds approximately 30 to 40 tools, model performance degrades measurably. Tool selection accuracy drops. This is not a governance decision. It is a model capability limit. When you approach that threshold, you split. The secondary signal is team ownership boundaries. If 2 different teams need independent releases, child agents do not work. Facilitation tip. Sketch the 3 patterns as a spectrum from low governance complexity, child, to high governance complexity, A2A. Draw attention to the DLP row explicitly. Question to pose. If a connected agent's DLP policy is updated in production by the team that owns it, not by you, how would you detect that change before it causes a production failure? Timing, 10 minutes. Reference calibration. This matrix is the decision tool you take off the slide and use in a design review. Walk each row. OM ownership. Child agents have no separate solution. They live inside the parent's package. Connected agents have separate solutions and are independently promotable. External A2A agents have entirely separate OM on a different platform. Tool budget trigger. Child is right when you are under the threshold. Connected is triggered when you exceed it or when team ownership splits. A2A is triggered when the specialized capability is on a different platform entirely. Deployment independence. The most operationally significant difference between child and connected. If the leave management team needs to deploy a hotfix without touching the orchestrator's release pipeline, they cannot do that with a child agent. They can with a connected agent. This is frequently the deciding factor when the tool count is borderline. Reusability. Child agents are not reusable outside their parent. They are embedded. Connected agents can be referenced by multiple orchestrators. The same leave management agent can serve the HR portal, the onboarding agent, and the offboarding agent. DLP exposure. Child inherits the parent environment's policy. One audit surface. Connected agents each bring their own DLP surface. Audit each environment independently. A2A external agents bring third-party governance you cannot directly control. Latency profile. Important for SLAs. Each connected agent adds one network hop. A2A external agents add variable latency. Load test before production. Question to pose. For Meridian's HR portal with 47 tools, 3 team ownership boundaries, and an independent hotfix requirement, which pattern applies? Let participants converge on connected agents. That is the setup for the case study. Timing: 15 minutes. Applied analysis. Meridian Financial is the scenario thread for this entire session. The HR portal agent started as a single orchestrator, a completely reasonable starting point. It grew. Leave management, policy FAQ, document retrieval, payroll queries, compliance checks, and onboarding workflows were all added. At 47 tools, they were 10 to 15 tools past the performance threshold. Tool selection accuracy degraded. Users were getting wrong action suggestions, not errors, wrong actions, which is in some ways harder to diagnose than outright failures. Latency hit 12 seconds on peak requests. That is a service failure. Work through each split signal and explain why each was independently sufficient to justify the refactor. 47 tools exceeded the threshold. Degradation was measurable in the usage analytics. Team ownership had already fragmented. HR, IT, compliance, and payroll each owned subsets. No single team could approve all changes. Independent release cadence needed. Leave management needed hotfix deploys without waiting for policy FAQ or compliance to sync their testing. And then the DLP surprise. When the leave agent was deployed to a separate environment in production, the HR API custom connector was classified non-business in that environment's DLP policy. Silent runtime failure. No error surfaced to users. No alert. The agent simply did not work for leave-related queries. That failure eroded trust in the entire AI program. Outcome after refactoring: connected agents chosen over child agents for independent OM and reusability. Tool count per agent brought down to 12 to 15. Accuracy restored, latency below 4 seconds, and a DLP audit per environment added to every deployment checklist. That checklist item is what Slide 15 workshop formalizes. Key teaching point: the DLP surprise at deployment is the most important outcome. When you build multi-agent systems, you inherit the full set of policies across every environment you touch. The audit is not optional. Question to pose: what would you have done differently at the point when the orchestrator hit 30 tools? Give 3 minutes for discussion. Timing: 15 minutes. New capability. Deep dive. Model context protocol is an open specification, not a Microsoft proprietary interface, for how AI models connect to context and document servers. An MCP server exposes tools, which are callable functions with schemas, and resources, which are documents or data references. Copilot Studio connects to any server that implements the specification. Transport modes: HTTP SSC uses server-sent events for streaming responses. Streamable HTTP uses chunked request and response. Both are supported. The distinction is mostly relevant to the MCP server implementation team. As an admin, what matters is that the connection uses HTTP, and HTTP is governed by DLP. When you connect an MCP server, the agent surfaces its tools and resources as first-class capabilities alongside connectors and skills. Existing MCP-compliant infrastructure, document retrieval servers, search systems, knowledge bases, can be connected without building custom connector definitions. DLP enforcement surface: the MCP server connection is governed by the MCP connector in DLP. You allow or block the server URL. The connector policy applies to the transport layer. To permit an MCP connection, classify the MCP connector as business in your DLP policy and allow the specific server URL. The governance gap: spend time here. When a developer adds a new tool to the MCP server, Copilot Studio surfaces it automatically. No admin approval step, no notification, no review workflow. If the MCP server developer adds a delete document tool tonight, the HR orchestrator has the ability to delete documents tomorrow morning without anyone in the admin team being notified. The mitigation is external. Establish a change control process for MCP server tool additions that sits outside of Copilot Studio. A service request, a PR review, a change advisory board. Whatever your organization's governance process is, MCP server tool additions must flow through it. Facilitation tip: ask if anyone has already connected an MCP server in a non-production environment. Their experience will enrich the discussion. Question to pose: does Copilot Studio provide a way to see what tools an MCP server exposed at a specific point in time? Not natively. Your change control log is the only audit trail for historical tool additions. Timing: 15 minutes. Connector governance fundamentals. Connectors have been in scope since month 2 and month 3. In multi-agent systems, connector governance choices made at individual agent level compound. Walk the 3 connector types and 2 authentication modes carefully. Pre-built connectors are Microsoft maintained and already classified in DLP as business or non-business. SharePoint, Dataverse, Outlook known governance profiles. Your primary lever is confirming they are in the right classification for your active policy. Custom connectors are admin-defined open API schemas targeting any REST API. The governance advantage is schema visibility. You can see exactly what the connector does, what endpoints and operations it exposes. Connector classification is your governance lever. REST API tools. Ad hoc API definitions created directly in Copilot Studio without a full connector definition. Lower governance visibility. They do not appear in the DLP connector catalog the same way as registered connectors. If you see REST API tools in an agent's configuration during an audit, that is a flag for deeper review. Authentication mode is where data governance really differentiates. User credential mode means the API call is made using the end user's identity. Per user data scoping, per user audit trails, OAuth delegation required. It is the correct choice for any integration touching sensitive personal data. When an employee asks the leave management agent about their leave balance with user credentials, only that employee's data is accessible to that specific request, and the HR system log shows which employee made the request. Maker credential mode means a service account identity is embedded at design time. Every user shares the same API identity. Simpler to configure, but the audit trail collapses. Every API call logs the service account, not the employee. For HR or finance APIs where individual employee actions must be attributable to a specific person, maker credentials are a compliance liability, not just an operational preference. Endpoint filtering restricts which URLs a connector action can call, available on SharePoint and public web connectors, applied per connector definition. Important limitation: it does not prevent other connectors or HTTP nodes from reaching the same URL through a different path. Question to pose: a developer argues that maker credentials are fine for the leave management API because the agent itself is already authenticated. Where does that reasoning fail? Timing: 15 minutes. Skills and HTTP node deep dive skills invoke power automate cloud flows as agent actions. Governance operates at 2 levels: the DLP connector classification at the policy level and the allow list at the agent configuration level. Walk the 4 configuration steps. Step 1. Enabling skills in the agent settings under configuration. This is the capability gate. Once enabled, the agent has access to any flow it can technically reach. What technically reach means depends on the service account and the allow list, which is why Step 3 is critical. Step 2. DLP on the Copilot Studio connector. Classifying it as business or non-business at the policy level controls whether skills capability is permitted in that environment. If you need to completely disable skills, blocking the Copilot Studio connector in DLP is the policy-level control. Step 3. Allow list population. After enabling skills, explicitly enumerate which power automate flows the agent is permitted to invoke. This is the operational minimum for governed skills usage. The allow list is an explicit whitelist. Only listed flows are accessible. Step 4. Flow version awareness. This is the silent governance gap that parallels the MCP tool addition gap. A flow author updates a flow's logic, renames an action, adds a step, changes what data is returned. The agent's skill configuration receives no notification. The behavior changes silently at the next invocation. Native version pinning for skills does not exist. Establish a change notification process with flow owners. Any modification to a flow on the allow list requires notification to the agent admin before deployment. HTTP request node governance, right panel. The endpoint filter on an HTTP request node restricts which URLs that specific node can call. It is a per-node configuration. A second HTTP request node in any other topic is entirely independent. The first node's filter has no effect on it. DLP HTTP connector block at the policy level is the only comprehensive control. When blocked, no HTTP request node in the entire environment can make outbound calls. In environments where external HTTP calls are genuinely needed, apply this control selectively per environment. The principle, clearly stated, endpoint filtering is defense in depth. DLP blocking is the primary control. If endpoint filtering is the only thing preventing unauthorized HTTP calls, the governance posture is inadequate. The allow list default danger, give this its own moment. If skills are enabled and the allow list is left empty, the agent has access to every Power Automate flow the agent's service account can access. In a production environment, that typically means dozens or hundreds of flows. This is a lateral movement risk. Always populate the allow list immediately after enabling skills. This is a deployment gate, not an optional step. Question to pose. A flow owner updates a flow that is on your agent's allow list. The change adds a step that writes conversation content to an external third-party system. How would you detect this change, and what process would have prevented it? Timing, 10 minutes. Consolidation and reference calibration. This comparison table consolidates the 4 integration mechanisms covered in Hours 1 and 2 and gives participants a reference for the Hour 2 workshop on slide 13. Walk each row. Primary use case: MCP for MCP spec compliant servers. Skills for existing Power Automate flows. Custom connector for REST APIs with defined schemas. HTTP request node for ad hoc calls where no formal connector definition is warranted. DLP surface. Each mechanism has a distinct DLP surface. MCP has the MCP connector URL policy. Skills have the Copilot Studio connector classification and the allow list. Custom connectors have standard connector classification. HTTP nodes have the HTTP connector DLP block and per node endpoint filters. An audit that covers only one surface misses the others. Authentication. MCP authentication is configured at the server connection level. Skills inherit the flow's connection credentials. Whatever identity the flow was built with is the identity used at runtime. Custom connectors offer user credential or maker credential selection. HTTP request nodes use service account or anonymous, no native OAuth delegation. Governance complexity. HTTP request nodes carry the highest complexity because the endpoint filter is the only guardrail, and it is per node in scope. MCP and skills are medium because of the tool addition and flow version silent change issues respectively. Custom connectors are low to medium because the schema is explicit and auditable. Admin control levers. This column is the operational checklist for audit. For each integration in a production topology, the question is, which lever is active and is it set correctly? Question to pose. Which of these 4 would you be most concerned about encountering in an inherited production tenant with no governance documentation? Let them discuss. HTTP request node with no DLP block is the common answer, and correctly so. Timing: 15 minutes. External agent governance A2A protocol is in preview as of May 2026. That preview status has governance implications. Preview features do not carry the same SLA commitments as generally available features. Before using A2A in a production topology, confirm the current GA status for each platform connection. 3 A2A connectable platforms. Microsoft Foundry agents connect from Copilot Studio via A2A configuration. Governance involves 2 layers, Azure RBAC in addition to Copilot Studio DLP. The Foundry workspace admin must grant access. You are operating across 2 governance stacks simultaneously. Microsoft Fabric data agents expose semantic model queries over A2A. The critical governance point is that data exfiltration DLP must be evaluated at the Fabric workspace level independently of Copilot Studio DLP. If a Fabric agent can query a semantic model containing PII, the question is whether that data can flow back through the Copilot Studio agent to an end user who should not have access to it. The Fabric workspace admin and the Copilot Studio admin must both conduct independent assessments. M365 agents SDK agents, custom agents built with the Microsoft 365 SDK. Each carries its own DLP exposure. The SDK is not governed by Power Platform DLP. Each must be independently enrolled in governance reviews with a named DLP owner. Governance requirements, right panel, named DLP owner per agent. Every agent in a topology must have a named owner responsible for DLP compliance. The orchestrator admin team is not solely responsible. Shared topology diagram. Any multi-agent solution going to production must have a diagram showing all agent-to-agent connections and DLP boundaries. Without this diagram, DLP audits are incomplete by definition. Cross-org governance. When an A2A connection crosses an organizational boundary, establish a bilateral data sharing agreement covering DLP, data residency, and incident response. Latency budgeting. Each orchestration hop adds 1 to 3 seconds of network overhead. A 3-hop chain, orchestrator to subagent to MCP server, or orchestrator to subagent to A2A external agent, can accumulate 8 to 12 seconds of latency. Load test multi-hop chains. Configure timeout values explicitly. If timeout is not configured, the agent waits indefinitely for a slow external response and fails ungracefully. Question to pose. A Fabric data agent is joined to your topology and governed by a separate team. Their workspace contains columns with PII. How do you establish a governance model for data flowing through the A2A connection? Timing, 15 minutes. Most important conceptual content of the session. This is the single most important concept in month 5 from a governance perspective. The core misunderstanding. People treat the orchestrator's DLP policy as a canopy that covers all connected agents. It does not. Each connected agent lives in its own environment with its own DLP policy. A connector allowed in the orchestrator's environment may be blocked in the connected agent's environment. When that mismatch exists, the result is a silent runtime failure. The agent does not return an error. It simply does not complete the expected action. Walk the 3 environment diagram. HR orchestrator environment with DLP policy A. Dataverse and SharePoint are classified business. HTTP is blocked. The MCP server URL is allowed. The Copilot Studio connector is classified business. Leave management environment with DLP policy B. Dataverse is business, but the HR API custom connector is classified non-business. When the orchestrator calls the leave management connected agent, and that agent attempts to invoke the HR API, Policy B's non-business classification produces a runtime failure in that environment. The orchestrator's policy has no visibility into what happens inside the connected agent's environment. The failure is silent at the user level. Policy FAQ environment with DLP policy C. SharePoint and Copilot Studio connector are both classified business. The skills allow list has exactly 3 flows listed. Clean governance posture. 3 pitfalls, give each its moment. Pitfall 1, connector allowed in orchestrator, blocked in subagent environment. This is the Meridian DLP surprise. The diagnostic path is to check each connected agent's environment DLP policy independently. Do not assume the orchestrator's policy covers downstream environments. Pitfall 2, policy change without notification. A connected agent's DLP policy is updated in production by the subagent's environment admin. No alert is sent to the orchestrator team. The orchestrator team discovers the change when users report failures. Establish a cross-team policy change notification process. This is an operational agreement between environment admin teams, not a Copilot Studio configuration. Pitfall 3. Child versus connected agent OM. Teams that need independent release cadences, but use child agents discover this constraint at the worst moment, when they need to push a hotfix. Child agents cannot be independently promoted. This is a design constraint that requires a refactor to correct after the fact. Question to pose. How many of you currently have cross-environment connected agent topologies where you know, with certainty, the DLP policy applied in each subagent environment? The silence this question typically produces is the best motivation for the Hour 4 audit workshop. Timing: 20 minutes. 15 minutes for participants to work through the mapping, 5 minutes for discussion set up the exercise. Participants work individually or in pairs. For each of Meridian's 4 integration requirements, select the correct mechanism and articulate the governance justification. Do not show the slide answers until after the group has attempted the exercise independently. Integration: A. Legacy document retrieval from a standards compliant server endpoint. The system already implements MCP natively. MCP server connection is the correct choice. Governance actions. Classify the MCP connector as business in DLP, allow the server URL, and establish external change control for tool additions. Integration: B. Leave management HR API that must act on behalf of the individual employee. The on behalf of requirement is the decision signal. Maker credentials lose the per-employee identity. User credentials preserve the per-user audit trail required for HR data compliance. Custom connector with user credential authentication is the correct choice. Integration: C. Policy FAQ answers from an existing Power Automate cloud flow. The flow already exists. Skills is the right mechanism. Governance actions. Classify Copilot Studio connector as business in DLP, populate the allow list with the specific flow, and establish a change notification agreement with the flow owner. Integration: D. Public regulatory website scraping, low sensitivity, read-only specific domain. One-off call. No connector definition warranted. HTTP request node with endpoint filter configured to the specific regulatory domain. The HTTP connector must not be blocked in the active DLP policy for this environment. Schedule quarterly review. After reveal, debrief the mapping. Ask where participants were uncertain. Those areas of uncertainty are the areas most likely to surface as governance gaps in practice. Question to pose. For integration: B. Why does user credential mode create a harder implementation requirement than maker credentials? And is that additional complexity justified? Timing: 50 minutes 10 minute setup at 2:00, 40-minute build to 2:50, 10-minute checkpoint. What to say at 2:00. Confirm setup requirements before participants start. Verify. Microsoft 365 developer tenant with Copilot Studio license. Copilot Studio environment provisioned. Pack CLI installed and authenticated. Run pack auth list to verify. MCP server simulator endpoint URL from the learning portal. 2 browser profiles ready, 1 admin, 1 end user. If anyone is missing a prerequisite, resolve it in the first 10 minutes. A participant blocked on setup will fall behind in the build phase and produce an incomplete audit in Hour 4. Task A. Create the HR orchestrator agent in the primary environment. This is the entry point for all HR interactions. Participants who completed month 4 adapt their autonomous agent. Participants starting fresh create a new agent with a description that reflects the HR orchestration role. Task B. Connect the leave management agent as a connected agent from a separate environment with user credential authentication. If participants do not have a separate environment, Walk them through creating one using the month 1 patterns. The separate environment is important. It is what makes the multi-environment DLP audit in Hour 4 realistic. Task C. Connect the policy FAQ agent as a connected agent from the shared environment. Configure the skills allow list to include only the policy FAQ flow. Do not leave the allow list empty. The Hour 4 audit specifically reviews this configuration. Task D. Connect the MCP document retrieval server using the simulator endpoint URL. Navigate to Settings, then Tools, then add a tool and select Model Context Protocol. Verify the Search Documents tool and Get Document Resource appear after connecting. Seeing the MCP tools listed is the build success criterion for this task. Task E. Apply DLP policies at each environment boundary. Dataverse and share point as business in the orchestrator environment. HTTP blocked in the orchestrator environment. HR API connector classification reviewed in the leave management environment. Skills allow list in the policy FAQ environment verified. At 2:50, facilitator checkpoint. Walk around and confirm each participant has at minimum an HR orchestrator agent connected to at least one sub-agent and the MCP server connection showing exposed tools. Participants who have not reached this minimum should be prioritized for assistance. Question to pose during checkpoint. Show me your DLP policy for the leave management environment. What is the current classification for the HR API custom connector? Timing 20 minutes 3:00:03:20. The audit workshop is the Hour 4 opening activity and the primary assessment deliverable. Walk participants through the audit table structure before they begin. 5 columns: agent, integration point, policy applied, exposure risk, remediation. Every agent in your topology gets audited. Every integration point gets a row. Walk the completed example rows. HR orchestrator / MCP document retrieval. MCP connector classified business. Low risk because the classification is correct. Remediation. Establish tool addition change control process. This is a maintenance governance action, not an active misconfiguration. HR orchestrator / connected agent calls to leave management. DLP policy in the orchestrator has no connector rule governing cross-environment calls directly. Medium risk. The gap is in documentation and process, not active misconfiguration. Remediation. Audit policy B in the leave management environment and document the cross-environment data flow. Leave management / HR API custom connector, classified non-business in policy B. This is the high-risk row. That is the classification mismatch from slide 12 made concrete. Remediation. Reclassify in policy B to business. Retest the complete flow from orchestrator through leave management to the HR API. Policy FAQ / skills power automate flow. Copilot Studio connector is business. Allow list is active. Low risk. Remediation. Verify the allow list contains only the 3 approved flows and add a flow change notification process. Policy FAQ / HTTP request node for regulatory scraping. HTTP connector is not blocked. Endpoint filter is active. Medium risk because endpoint filter as sole control is architecturally inadequate in principle. Remediation. Verify the endpoint filter restricts to a single regulatory domain and schedule quarterly review. The completed audit table with all 5 rows fully populated is the governance validation report deliverable, 25% of the month 5 assessment. Participants present their completed tables in the 3, 23, 45 presentations. Question to pose. Which row in your audit table represents the highest production risk, and what would happen if you deployed the topology today without remediating it? Timing, 10 minutes before presentations. Consolidation 6 pitfalls. These appear in production incident reports. Walk each briefly. DLP blind spot across connected agent boundaries, treating the orchestrator's DLP policy as covering all connected agents. Each connected agent environment must be audited independently. This is the Meridian DLP surprise made general. Child versus connected agent for OM. Using child agents when teams need independent release cadences. Child agents have no separate solution layer and cannot be independently promoted through DEV to test to prod. This is a design constraint that cannot be patched after the fact without refactoring. MCP tool additions without governance. New tools added to an MCP server surface to the agent automatically. Without an external change control process, unapproved tools reach production agents silently. No Copilot Studio configuration fixes this. It requires a process agreement with the MCP server development team. Skills allow list left empty, enabling skills and not populating the allow list. The default state gives the agent access to all reachable flows. Every Power Automate flow the service account can access. This is not a theoretical risk. It is the default behavior. HTTP endpoint filter as primary control, relying on per-node endpoint filters as the sole HTTP governance control. A second HTTP node in any topic bypasses the filter. DLP HTTP connector block is the only comprehensive control. Latency underestimation in deep chains. 3-hop chains accumulate 8 to 12 seconds of latency. Load testing is not optional. Timeout configuration is a governance artifact, not just an operational setting. Question to pose: which of these 6 have you already seen in a tenant you have worked with? This typically generates strong discussion and valuable peer learning. Timing. 8 minutes Observability Governance Application Insights gives you observability across the full multi-agent topology. Enable it through the Application Insights in Copilot Studio connector. Link the connector to an Azure Application Insights workspace in the same region as your Copilot Studio environment. Data residency matters here and must align with your organization's compliance requirements. What gets captured by default? Conversation transcripts, topic trigger rates, escalation events, error rates per agent. These are the signals that tell you whether your topology is behaving as designed at an operational level. For cross-agent latency tracking, use the trace Power FX function to emit custom telemetry events at each orchestration hop. The reference on the right shows the pattern. Emit an agent hop latency event with the agent name, duration in milliseconds, success flag, and session ID. Repeat after each connected agent call. Correlate these events in App Insights to build an end-to-end latency picture across the full topology. The DLP consideration for Application Insights is frequently overlooked. Conversation data written to App Insights may include PII names, HR data, anything the user typed during the conversation. The Application Insights Workspace connector must be classified as business in DLP. The workspace region must comply with your data residency requirements. Do not treat App Insights as an IT-only infrastructure tool exempt from data governance review. One critical instruction on the Power FX sample: do not include user content in custom event fields. Emit correlation identifiers and performance metrics only. Any content that came from the user belongs in the secured transcript capture, not in custom telemetry events. Facilitation tip: walk through the trace Power FX pattern and point out that duration MS requires the topic author to capture a timestamp before the connected agent call and compute the difference after. Identify where those variables would be set in the topic flow. Question to pose: your App Insights telemetry shows agent hop latency spikes for the leave management agent every day at 0900. What would you investigate first? Timing: 8 minutes. Reference walkthrough before build challenge 3 steps to connect an MCP server in Copilot Studio, plus the admin governance action that must accompany every MCP connection in a production agent. Step 1. In Copilot Studio, navigate to the agent settings, select Tools, then add a tool and choose Model Context Protocol as the tool type. This applies to any agent in the topology. Step 2. Enter the MCP server URL and select the transport mode. HTTP SSC for event-driven streaming responses. Streamable HTTP for chunked request and response. The Meridian MCP server in the challenge uses SSC transport. The descriptor on the right shows the configuration. The URL follows the internal endpoint format with /SSC appended. Step 3. Verify the exposed tools. After connecting, confirm that search documents and get document appear in the tools list. Take a screenshot. This is part of your deliverable evidence file for the MCP integration documentation component of the assessment. The admin governance note at the bottom of the left panel is the action that must accompany every MCP connection added to a production agent. Establish an external change control process. Require a ticket and an admin review before any tool is added to the production MCP server. The configuration reference JSON on the right shows the authentication structure, API key authentication for the Meridian server. Note that user-level OAuth delegation is not available through MCP server connections. This is one of the authentication limitations specific to the MCP mechanism. Facilitation tip. This slide is reference material for the build challenge. Walk through the steps verbally before hour 3 so participants know the path before they are under time pressure. Question to pose. After you connect the MCP server and verify search documents is exposed, what is the next governance action before you route any live traffic through this connection? Timing: 15 minutes presentations 3:23:45, then wrap up 3:45:400, what to say at 3:20. Invite 2 or 3 volunteers to present their hour 3 topology and hour 4 DLP audit table. Structure each presentation. Briefly describe the topology built. Walk the DLP audit table. Identify the one finding they would prioritize for remediation in a production scenario, and explain why. Peer feedback should focus on: is the topology pattern justified by the dimensions in the decision matrix? Is the DLP classification coverage complete across all environments? And are the remediation actions specific and actionable? At 3:45, closing. Month 5 is complete. You have designed a multi-agent topology using the decision matrix, built the Meridian HR orchestrator with connected agents and MCP integration, and run a structured DLP audit across every boundary in that topology. 4 assessment deliverables, each worth 25%. Architecture design document. Topology diagram showing the Meridian HR orchestrator with all connected agents, integration mechanisms labeled, and written justification for each topology and mechanism choice. Working topology in Copilot Studio. Evidence of the connected agent configuration, screenshots of the orchestrator's connected agent list, the MCP server connection showing exposed tools, and the skills allow list configuration. MCP integration documentation, the MCP connection configuration, the list of tools exposed by the MCP server, and an assessment of the DLP implications specific to that server connection. Governance validation report, the completed DLP audit table from slide 15, with remediation actions, presented in hour 4 and attached to the submission package. The offline milestone before month 6. Extend the Meridian topology with at least one A2A external agent connection. Document the DLP governance model across the cross-team boundary, who owns the external agent, what DLP policy governs it, and what bilateral agreement would be required for production. Month 6 covers governance at scale, center of excellence tooling, and production readiness. Everything in month 5 was about building and governing a single multi-agent solution. Month 6 is about governing many solutions across an organization. Everything built and documented across months 1 through 5 is the foundation month 6 builds on. Question to pose. Before you leave today, name the one governance gap in your topology that you are most concerned about and what you plan to close before month 6. Facilitator preparation checklist. Provision the MCP server simulator endpoint in the learning portal before the session. Participants need this URL for task D in the build challenge. Confirm all participants have developer tenants with Copilot Studio licenses, trial or paid, and pack CLI installed and authenticated. Review slide 12. DLP multi-agent boundaries, carefully before the session. It contains the most nuanced content and generates the most questions. Print or share the decision matrix, slide 5. An integration comparison table, slide 10, as quick reference artifacts for participants to use during the Hour 2 workshop and Hour 3 build. The Hour 4 audit workshop, slide 15, requires participants to have a working topology from Hour 3. Pace Hour 3 accordingly. Prioritize topology connectivity over polish. Application insights, slide 17, and MCP config reference, slide 18, are reference slides. Walk them verbally before the build challenge so participants know the configuration path before they are under time pressure.